I want to start by thanking the organizers for scheduling my session right after the beer break. It's awesome. So my name is Sveta Kostinsky. I've been with Perfecto for the last 6 years. And what I would like to talk to you about today is how does mobile disrupt your world? How does mobile introduces, what kind of challenges does mobile introduce into the CI processes that you have today and into the testing processes that you have today? So, if I compare the number of releases that I used to have to the number of releases that I have today when it comes to mobile, I can see that the number jumps from 4 per year in 2010 to 36 per year. How do I cope with that? How do I cope with the mobile challenge and sustaining high quality despite the velocity and the number of changes the market requires for me to introduce into my app? How do I do that? Let's talk for a second about how do I interact with my application. So when on my way to work, during my commute, I work on my tablet, I check Facebook or my phone, I receive incoming calls, I switch from different apps, from one app to another, I send text messages, I start submitting my expense report, I go back to Facebook and I go back to my expense report. I have different network conditions which my device resides in, and this is my test environment. So my final test environment should be able to reflect all these different environmental conditions my application resides in. If I break those down to all those sections, I can go over the list of I need to be able to download my application from the store. I need to be able to apply different network conditions for my application to experience. I need to be able to experience going into a tunnel on a train with my application and going out of the tunnel and test my application under those network conditions. I need to be able to test context switching. I want to post from my application to Facebook. I want to use the device camera, for example. So I'm sharing my device resources with applications like Instagram. I need to make sure that the handoff of the resource is done properly. iOS 6 Plus has really high screen resolution. So Apple would measure my memory consumption on this device, and they would kill the application with a higher memory consumption. If I have a hybrid application, what will happen? That they will kill the web container, but not the native application. Meaning the next time when I'll bring up the application, it will show up like it's underperforming. So what is my test environment in this case? Is this only my application, or it's the actual device with the different environmental conditions on this device? Are there other applications running on the device in the background? Is Spotify consuming the device memory, the device CPU, the network? Do I need to test that? How early during the test cycle do I need to test that? Do I need to test application download from the store? My application will store different files on the device. Typically, as a tester, I would test a download of the vanilla version. What happens if I use my application for some time, and then after a few months I have a bunch of files stored? Do I test that scenario? Do I test the upgrade of that application version? Okay. There are a lot of things I need to test outside of my application, not only inside the application, that will affect my application performance and quality. Interacting of my device with other devices. Beacon technology, I need to be able to test that. If I have location-based services, I need somehow to simulate that environment for my application. For example, if I'm Nordstrom and I'm looking for the closest Nordstrom location using my device, I need to be able to simulate somehow these conditions for my device to experience. So if I look at the standard testing practice and I try to apply that on mobile, is it still correct? What will be the change? So first of all, the things that will be added are all the different. I will be spending much more time on UI testing, just because I have the introduction of all the different operating system versions, screen sizes, form factors. This will cause me to spend more time on UI testing. The target environments of different networks, orientations. Remember, for each device we have basically 2 orientations. It's not just a single device orientation. I will need to test that as well. So the time I will spend on UI testing will be significantly higher than just on what we used to in desktop testing. On top of that, we have the performance testing that we need to introduce earlier during the cycle. Our environment is very complex. Like I mentioned, we have a lot of resources, a lot of applications competing on the same resources, same network, shared network, as well as security testing. So I have a limited amount of time I can spend on testing when it comes to Agile. So I need to manage my time and to budget it very, very strictly and precisely. This is just an example. However, everyone would need to keep that in mind, that you are basically on a time budget, and you will need to allocate different times to each step. So you have time budget and device constraints. Okay? You will not be able to test all the time on all the devices that you have. So you'll need to decide what kind of tests are important to take at which step. So you might start with about 4 devices to execute your unit system test and some of the smoke tests. On average, this kind of testing you will do it per commit, and they will run on average 15-20 minutes per day. Okay? This is very efficient in terms of fast feedback loop. You'll be able to uncover the main bugs. Then you want to scale, and you want to introduce more of the regression testing. In this case, you will want to introduce additional devices, additional form factors. Going up to the weekly tests, when you have more time, you can run longer regression. Now, let's take a sample of a flow, of continuous integration flow, and break down the bottlenecks and see how we cope with the bottlenecks in that flow. So I will take my Jenkins build, and by the way, all the tools here are replaceable with other tools, similar to Jenkins, Bamboo, TeamCity, whatever CI server you're using. I will take my code from GitHub, I will compile it, I will build it, all the dependencies with Maven, execute the test-ng in parallel, because I want to run the code in parallel on all the different devices or browsers. Execute through Selenium grid on my lab, and get the results back to Jenkins. Okay? And this is the flow that I would like to achieve with CI. Now let's take a look, where will we have the bottlenecks? What will be our problems? Let's take a look at these 4 steps: setup, stability, test scenario limitations, and reporting. So what are the main challenges around adding real devices? Devices are not meant to run automation 24/7. Sometimes they get stuck. Okay? So I need to be able to have OS-level control over the devices. I'd be able to get them back into the execution loop if the device gets stuck. So I need to be able to power cycle the device remotely. I need to be able to interact with anything that occurs on the device's screen, any pop-up that blocks my execution. And I need to have an SLA of uptime of these devices. Whether I'm doing it myself by setting up a private lab, or I'm using a vendor, I need to have an SLA of uptime. And device lab is the first challenge that you will have. Okay. Parallel execution capability. When I'm talking about CI, in order to scale, I have to have the ability to execute my scripts in parallel on multiple devices, get all the results back, and have an analytic capability which will tell me, for example, your scripts didn't run on iOS 7 devices. You have a specific problem with iOS 7 devices. So I need to be able to run the scripts in parallel and have analytic tools that will give me those clear results of whether I'm able or not able, or if I have a specific bug in a specific region, I will be able to easily identify that region and that bug. I need to be able to embed execution logic. So imagine I have 10 devices in the cloud. I have multiple scripts and multiple tests competing on the same devices. I need to be able to set up the execution-based attributes. For example, run my execution on all the iOS 9 devices. iOS 9 is being released soon. I want to make sure that my script, my application is compatible to all the iOS 9 devices. I want to check out the code. Running my scripts by attributes will allow me to do 2 things. Embed execution logic. Then I can make sure that my application is fitted to all the possible screen sizes, specific operating system version, specific carrier, as well as release some of the device resources. I don't want to be dependent on a specific device to be available for execution. I want to execute on any iOS 7 device which is currently available. Okay? So this will allow me to manage my resources better way, as well as embed execution logic. How should I develop my scripts in a way that they will fit my team? Today in our testing team, the team is very varied. Some people come from the testing background, some people come from the development background. They all need to be able to collaborate on the toolset that they're using. What are the challenges that they will have? How can I solve some of the bottlenecks in setting up the scripts and setting up the execution environment? So first of all, I can use tools like BDD and Cucumber, where some of the code is very descriptive, generic. You don't need to be able to code on a very deep level. So you'll be able to build your logic in a simple English, and then implement the code itself to have the code implementation in the coding language that you wish. You need to be able to create your objects on the level that you'll be able to extrapolate the POM model, where you have the object repository separated from the rest of the code. You'll be able to then structure and remodel the scripts in a way that it will be modularized. Cross-platform testing, and this where visual analysis, I'll talk a little bit about later, will be very handy, as well as ability to describe your objects using XPath or other attributes. And then you'll be able to run a single script, both on Android as well as iOS devices. Parallel execution, same script, low amount of maintenance. Some of the biggest challenges is the amount of failures that we have. So how do we make sure that we don't have false positives? What can we do to prevent it? First of all, we need to make sure that our environment is stable. Whether it's the test server that we're hitting, communicating from our app, or the devices themselves. So before I launch my script, I want to make sure that my environments are up and running, and that my devices are up and running, that the devices are active and connected to Wi-Fi. Did you know, by the way, that, for example, Android devices, they get disconnected from Wi-Fi every once in a while? So the way to cope with that will be running a script, setting them up with airplane mode, and then connecting them back to Wi-Fi. That's a health check that you need to do before you run the script. This way, you make sure you separate the environmental availability from the actual bugs that you want to uncover. Okay, so you need to make sure that your environment is stable, is up and running. Okay. You need to be able to separate the code from the execution management and addressing what I mentioned before of executing and embedding execution logic in terms of allocating devices by attributes will help you do that. And you need to be able to embed error handling on several levels. So if something goes wrong, you need to be able to restart the application. If that doesn't help, restart the device. If that doesn't help, restart the connection to the device. So you need to have several levels of error handling, as well as the ability to switch to other similar device. For example, I would execute my scripts to run on all the different screen sizes, and then I allocate an issue with a specific screen size. I will take the same screen size running different versions of operating system, and then I will try to identify whether it's an issue with a specific screen size, operating system version, or carrier. I can structure my execution to tell me where the problem is and to minimize my effort in analyzing the results. How do I make my scripts run faster? I don't have a lot of time. I'm trying to go to Agile. How do I embed performance into my scripts? I would try to apply automation best practices in terms of executing the POM object model. I will try to set up my scripts to execute in parallel. For this, I will need to have a script that will run on different devices, different operating systems, and to understand the differences in the execution logic. And I will also try to use sync mechanism. Instead of embedding wait points for my application to wait for something to happen, I will give a maximum timeout. So if I have a slower device that will execute slower, it will wait up until 30 seconds and then would keep going with the script. But it will not have hard-coded wait points. So in order for this all to work, I need to have a working cookbook, basically of all those processes working properly, whether it's my automation, my test framework to be able to work with all the different team members that I have in my team. I need to be able to do manual testing when needed. Manual testing is not fully replaceable with automation. There still will be required some manual testing. Apply real user conditions. Again, my application is living on a device, which is a complex environment, having other applications competing on the resources, network emulation. And I will need to introduce performance testing, network emulation testing, kind of wind tunnel testing earlier during the test cycle, already in the functional testing cycle. Okay. So those were some of the recommendations when I'm coming to work with CI. I would like to have to share my tools between the test and the development teams, introduce page object model, and maintain the code guidance. Now let's take a look at APM and Selenium and see how we can basically unleash the full power of the tool and embed all the practices that I mentioned before and take them into APM and Selenium remote web drivers. Okay. What are some of the additional functionalities that I would like to introduce? I would like to be able to have the system-level control over my device when I'm executing my script. So I mentioned before that devices get stuck. So the ability to restart the device and embed this error handling as part of my script is very important. I need to be able to post to other third-party applications. I might want to test my application after it's officially released to the market and download it from the App Store and test the production version of the app. All these scenarios are important to be able to test. So I need this OS-level control over the device on top of my APM driver to be able to execute my tests the way I want them to be executed. I want to parallel my scripts. So I want a simple structure and simple architecture where I can execute my scripts through a single grid. Some of them will run on mobile browsers. Some of them will run on desktop browsers. If it's a web-based application, with native applications, I will run them all on real mobile devices. And let's talk a little bit about the visual analysis capabilities. So why visual analysis is specifically really important when it comes to mobile? What are the challenges that it tries to solve? When we switch between different screen sizes, when we rotate the device's screen, when we switch between with the same application between different languages, same word, different languages can have different length, and text can concatenate. And visual analysis comes to solve this important issue. I will not be able to uncover that using native analysis because I know what are the objects that are present on my application on the screen, but I don't know if they're rendered properly. So the combination of visual and native analysis will give me this capability. For example, I can read all my objects natively, then parse them and make sure that they're rendered visually as expected. Okay? And the visual analysis drivers will allow us to do that on top of the native objects. There's a great tool, you've probably seen it in the show, Apply Tools. They do great work with visual analysis and analyzing whether your application is rendered properly on the different screen sizes and helping you identify those gaps. So the addition of visual analysis is specifically important when it comes to mobile device rotation screen, like in the example that you've seen here. That's an example in United application. A few versions ago, you go to a specific screen, you rotate the device, and then you go back, and that pop-up remains without being released. Okay, so there are some bugs that you will not be able to uncover using native without the visual analysis. It's a very important addition. And you can use the switch to context capability of APM to add these visual drivers to your script. We talked about environmental conditions. So the truth is that the application will be behaving in specific GPS geographical location. It will be under specific network conditions. It will be under environmental conditions on the device itself. You have other third-party applications competing on the device resources. I have Spotify running in the background. I need to be able to set up my environment in a way that my end user will be using the environment. And again, IPM allows us to do that with introducing different network conditions on my device, injecting GPS locations, iOS 9 which is about to be released, introduced additional audio injection capabilities. So you need to have audio injection capabilities to work with your device in order to be able to test this new functionality, which might come very soon to your applications. Okay. And on top of that, you need to have the stable environment, and there are different ways to set it up. One of them, this is something that, for example, Perfecto can help you with. We have a continuous quality lab where we set up and host the environment of the devices for you on SLA of uptime. Okay. That was really quick. All right.